Hello, and welcome to our first day of notes, y'all. What an exciting time. We are going to be talking today about solving multi-step equations. So, just a couple housekeeping rules. If you printed these notes out to follow along with me to get your notes credit for later in the week, then you do not need to do anything other than write your name up in the top left corner. All right, welcome to our first day of notes. Exciting times. We're going to be starting out this first unit and talking about equations and inequalities. And I just want to go over a couple housekeeping rules. As you can see at the top, you will find our title of our notes. The title of our notes will be there every day. If you printed out these notes as a PDF, and are following along with me, the only thing I need you to add besides the notes that you take today is your name in the top left corner. If, on the other hand, you are choosing to take notes just on a scrap sheet of paper, that is fine, on a lined sheet of paper, but please at the top just make sure you have your name, this title, Solving Multi-Step Equation Notes, and our date today. All right, so let's get started. Today's notes are going to be pretty review heavy. You've heard a lot of these things. You've heard of an equation. You've solved many multi-step equations. We're going to go over some key vocabulary, go over some properties that allow these equations to be solved, and then we will also be practicing some. So let's check out these vocabulary words up at the top. First of all, a variable. All a variable is a letter that stands for an unknown number. Now, the one that y'all are most used to seeing is the variable x, but any letter can be used. They're typically lowercase. Moving on over to expression. An expression is when you have numbers, variables, and operations. You can kind of think about it like a math sentence. Now, notice how when I say this word expression, I did not say equal sign. It's just a simple sentence that has numbers, variables, and operations. So, for example, 2x plus 9 is an example of an expression. And our last vocabulary word of today, equation. An equation is simply when you take two expressions and you set them equal to each other. So equation kind of has the word equal in it a little bit. That can help you remember it has to have an equal sign if it's an equation. Expression does not. So I want y'all to pause this video for a second and try to solve these equations off to the side. Solve this first one and this second one. Pause the video, we'll come back together in a minute. All right, let's check this out. So we got 4a plus 3 equals 11. Hopefully the first thing you did was recognize where your variable is. That's what we're trying to isolate. We need to get rid of that 3 first, so we subtract it from the left side. We get 4a equals 8. And then, because multiplication is occurring between the 4 and the a, you should divide by 4 to get your final answer is a equals 2. Moving over to the one right next to it. Two ways you could have solved this one. Maybe you distributed first. So we have 16 equals 6r minus 2. Then added 2 to both sides. We get 18 equals 6r divided by 6. And got your final answer is r equals 3. Some of y'all might have solved it a bit differently. You might have seen that this 2 is multiplying with the 3r minus 1, and you could have gotten rid of that 2 at the very beginning. So let's say we have 16 equals 2 times 3r minus 1 again. Another option for solving this, simply dividing by 2 at the very beginning. Got 16 divided by 2 is 8. The 2 divided by 2 cancels out to 1. Then you've got a simple 2-step equation to finish up with. Either way is absolutely correct. So hopefully those allowed you to get back in the mind space of solving equations. And remember, when you're solving equations, if you perform one operation on one side of the equation, then you must perform the same operation on the other side. You've got to keep the equations balanced. The equation must stay balanced. Now, we're going to take a pause real quick and talk about the properties that allow this stuff to happen. So these properties of equality are very obvious properties. They're not that confusing. But we are going to be taking time today to walk through what they allow us to do. So if we're looking at this first equation and we solve it, hopefully the first thing you would do when you solve that equation is you would subtract 2. The property of equality that allowed us to do that is called the subtraction property of equality. If you want to, you can abbreviate it. SPE. Then, if you were going to continue to solve this equation, you would hopefully divide by 3. You're probably guessing in your head what property that allows us to do that. The operation that we used was division. So the property that we call that is the division property of equality. If you want to abbreviate it DPE, you can. Moving on over to the right side. Don't get scared just because it has fractions. First thing you would do, hopefully you'd see you needed to add 5 to both sides of the equation. The property that allows us to keep that equation balanced using that addition is the addition property of equality. If you want to abbreviate it, you're more than welcome to. And last but not least, a couple ways you could solve this. You could either see that 1/2 is being multiplied with the x, so you could divide by 1/2, or you can multiply by the reciprocal 2. We get x equals 36. Property that allows us to do that is the multiplication property of equality. MPE. Just some helpful tips as we move on to the next page and we solve some equations. First things first, make sure you always apply the distributive property. Oh my goodness, what kind of mess is that? Always apply the distributive property first. So if you're seeing parentheses, make sure to distribute. And then you can always try to eliminate the fraction using multiplication. We will go over that a lot on our next page. Go ahead and flip it on over. All right, looking at this back side, you'll notice that we have lots of equations we're going to solve. And up at the top, we're going to solve the equations, and we're also going to. All right, looking at this back side, you'll notice that we have lots of equations we're going to solve. Checking out that first one, and up at the top, we're going to solve the basic equation, and we're also going to identify the property that we use allows us to solve them. When we get that variable isolated, we first one from each side. We get 4x equals just a basic 12. Equation. The property that allows us to do this, well, simply look when we get that variable isolated, we would subtract 2 from each side. Property, we get 4x equality. I'm just going to do a little bit of abbreviating there. The property that allows us to do this, well, simply look equation what property was used. You would hopefully recognize that 4 and x are being multiplied, so we use division. I'm just going to do a little bit of abbreviating. Division property of equality that allows us to finishing that equation, and we get x hopefully recognize that 4 and x are being multiplied. Now, I haven't gone over this yet, but remember, if you want to check your property of equality that allows us to plug it back into the equation to make sure it balances your equation. So we have 4 times 3. Now, I haven't gone over this yet, but remember, 4 times 3 is 12. 12 plus 2 is 14. Equals 14. Back into the equation to make sure it balances your equation. So we have 4 times 3. Solve the problem value for x. To the right. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 plus 2 is 14. Equals 14. After you unpause, let's check that out. Pause the video. You should have gotten that your final answer was solve the problem to the right. Equals 52. After you unpause, let's check that out. You should have gotten that your final answer was x. Moving on to when we have variables on both sides. We haven't touched this yet, so let's talk about what goes on here. So I would suggest that when you have variables on both sides, moving on to when we have variables on both sides. We haven't touched this yet, so you can deal with positive x's for the rest of your equation. So I would move that entire x to the other side of the equation. On both sides, we're going to look for where the smaller x is located. Move that x so you can deal with positive x's for the rest of your equation. 4x minus 3x is x. We're going to move that entire x to the other side of the equation. We're going to subtract 3x. What allowed us to do that? Well, simply the subtraction property of equality is equal to, moving right along, 4x minus 3x is x minus 13. Add 13. Add 13. We get what allowed us to do that? 14. Well, simply the subtraction property that allowed us to do that. Well, what operation was used? See a big old addition sign there? Add 13. It's the addition. We get property of equality. 14. Just like with before, if you wanted to do that, plug what operation was used into both locations where x is to make sure your equation is balanced. Property of equality. Take a second. Just like with before, to the side, if you wanted to, you this equation plug that 14 into both locations where x is to make sure your equation is balanced. Take a second, go over to the side, and try out this equation over here. Now, if you're trying this one out and you're a little overwhelmed because of the fractions, my suggestion to you is to look at these denominators and try to clear them out. If you're trying this one out and you're a little overwhelmed because of the fractions, my suggestion to you is to look at these denominators, denominator cancels, and try to clear them out. 3 and 6. What I mean by clear them out is find something that you can multiply both sides of your equation by. In your head, think about what 3 and 6 both denominator cancels. The smallest number. Now, if I'm looking at 3 and 6, I'm trying to find a common that number is 6 of 3 and 6. We're going to multiply in your head, think about 3 and 6 the entire equation through the smallest number that both fit into. Let's go ahead and distribute that number is 6. We're going to multiply the entire equation through by that least third times 6. Let's go ahead and distribute that 6 to every 6 over 1 single multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. So we have 1 times 6 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. A third times 6 divided by 3 is 2. Or you can think about it as a third of 6 is multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. So we have 1 plus 7 times 6 is 42. 3 times 1 is 3. Equal 1/6 times 6 is, or you can think about it as a third of x is minus 1 times 6 is 6. Plus 7 times 6 from there, it becomes a very basic equation again. You have a variable on both sides. Our smaller variable is this x on the right side, so we're going to move it is 6. From there, it becomes a very basic equation again. You have a variable on both sides. Equals our smaller variable is this x on the right side, so we're going to move it. You're bringing down a negative 6 to be with that 2x. Not just a. We get x. Plain old 6, that number equals that sign negative matters. 6. Please make sure. Keep it on grooving and moving. 6. You subtract just a. Plain old 6, that number, that sign in front matters. Subtract our 42. Keep it on grooving and moving. We subtract and negative 42 minus 6 gives us negative 48. Subtract our 42. Going through properties up here, and negative 42. You should recognize that as the multiplication property of equality. If you multiply the equation all the way through, keeps the equation balanced. We had the subtraction property. Going through properties up here, and you should recognize that as the multiplication property of equality. If you multiply the equation all the way through, keeps the equation balanced. Alrighty, going on down. Subtraction property of equality. And again, we had the subtraction property. Second to last set, practicing that distributive property. Again, I mentioned this on the front page. Alrighty, if you see going on down, you deal with this part of the equation first. So we're dealing right here. Second to last set, practicing that distributive property. Again, I mentioned this on the front page. If you see parentheses, distribute to both things, you deal with this part of the equation first. So we're dealing right here. First things first. A half of 2 is 1. So when we look at that 2 plus 2 times 6 distribute to both things inside that parentheses. And continue solving. should get x equals 1. Going back over our properties, we had the distributive property up here, of course. In our next step, we had the subtraction property of equality, subtraction property of equality again, and then the division property of equality. If you need to pause to catch up, please do so. And then I want you to try the problem on the to the right. Checking out this one, if you've unpaused, make sure you're trying it on your own. When we're multiplying 3/2 times 3, just a little fraction review. If you're multiplying by hand, you can always stick that whole number over 1. We get 9 over 2. So we have 9 over 2x plus, same dealio with multiplying by 5. 3 over 2 times 5 over 1. Multiply straight across. So we have 15 over 2. You can keep it as a fraction, improper fraction for now, because I'm going to review with y'all how to clear out that fraction. Remember to look at your denominators. Well, what's the smallest number that 2 and 2 both fit into? Hopefully you're thinking, well, it's 2, of course. Yep, you're right. We're going to multiply the whole equation by 2. When I say whole equation, I mean that 2 goes to everything. It goes to every number inside. 9/2 times 2, you should get 9x, plus 15/2 times 2, you get 15, equals negative 24 times 2, negative 48, plus 2x. When you finish that up, for the sake of time, you should get x equals negative 9. Going down to our very last set of problems, all the properties combined. This one has, of course, a set of parentheses, so we should recognize, oh, we need to deal with this guy first. And hopefully you're thinking in your head, to deal with that, I'm going to distribute. So we have 1/2 x minus 1/2 of 6 is 3. Don't be afraid off to the side. If you need to multiply that, you can. Equals 2 minus 3/4 x. Now, again, we have fractions. Don't freak out. Fractions are friends. What's the smallest number that 2 and 4 both fit into? 4. We're going to multiply the entire equation by 4. 1/2 of 4 is 2x. Minus 3 times 4 is 12. Equals 2 times 4, 8. Minus 3/4 of 4, do 3 times 4, that's 12. Divide by 4, you get 3. Continue solving. Final answer should be x equals 4. Pause the screen and try out that problem to the right over there. When you finish that one up, you should get x equals 4. Now, I want you to make sure when you're taking your notes, you can pause the video and rewatch as needed. I expect your notes to be as thorough as mine. No skipping of problems or taking down shortened equations. I expect your notes to be thorough. So whether you're printing off your notes or writing them on a lined sheet of paper, thorough and labeled is necessary. So I'll be logging back onto Zoom in a minute to make sure you don't have any questions. Otherwise, check out your homework, which will cover the same content. Talk to y'all soon.